truly humbled by the commitment of so many of you that have been at this year after year after year. For those of us who feel like we're newcomers to this movement, you're truly an inspiration, and I thank you. I'm going to tell you a little bit what I'm not going to talk about tonight. As being in the United Farm Workers, it often feels strange not to live in California, not to work in California, but I truly be blessed by not working or living here. So I'm not going to tell you much about what's going on. Having said that, we've had a tremendous couple of past years here in California. Believe it or not, here in California, we have passed the most progressive labor legislation anywhere in the United States. Wow. And as a result of that sacrifice of getting governors to sign things they really did not want to sign, we've been winning contracts and bringing workers under collective bargaining agreements, providing them with unprecedented wages and benefits. But having said that, I want to take us on somewhat of a global journey. When I had the honor of being with you several years back, I took you on a kind of an initial journey that we were setting out upon. And this evening, I want to take you a little bit deeper on some of the work I've been asked to design for the union, of really trying to reposition ourselves into the 21st and 22nd centuries. So I want to start with this concept that people move. We have the honor of working with the Catholic Church in Mexico, and they don't talk about it as immigration. They talk about this whole concept as the movilidad humana, a human mobility. And then so many of us move. I was born in Oakland, California. I was raised in Detroit, and I live in Washington, the state of Washington. Flew back from Mexico this morning. Irish, some of my descendants, over half the country came over at one point in the 1800s. Thai workers, Africans going to work and becoming the backbone of many European economies. So people move, and I really want to explore this concept and both the opportunities and the threats it presents of trying to put together an agricultural system that's truly just. So one thing that's really worth highlighting, there's at least 200 million immigrants across the world. Here in the United States, we continue to think we're the center of the universe. This whole idea of Mexican immigration, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about it? That's the only way that we define what's going on in terms of immigration globally. It's a very, very narrow perspective. In the Philippines, every year over 1 million of their nationals travel abroad to work in foreign employment. And at the height of immigration in the United States, it was expected, they guesstimated about 600,000 Mexican nationals would come into the United States. You have hundreds of thousands of Thais, of Nepalese, of Africans circling the globe looking for employment. Central Americans working throughout Europe. This is a global phenomenon of which we are a small part, but an important part. Because the remittances that immigrants send back home more than double the global budget of foreign aid. So I had the honor of visiting a number of communities earlier this week. I'm going to talk about this in Mexico. These are actually some of the homes that our members from Thailand were able to build as a result of their working abroad. And those remittances, right now, the livelihoods of many countries. In Mexico, remittances are the second most important source of economic revenue after petroleum sales. In El Salvador, that is the single most important revenue source. So, in spite of the scapegoating, the frankly hell so many immigrants go through in foreign employment, they are the backbones of the global economy. So I want to share with you a little personal reflection. I was down in Arizona earlier this year, and I had a very moving experience that I sent in a letter to my daughter, and she's given me permission to read this to you. And just try to set a context of what this means on a more personal level. So my letter to her reads as follows. Good morning, sweetheart. I want to share with you Jose Alfredo and Luis's stories. I woke up this morning at 2 a.m. to drive from Yuma to San Luis, Arizona, which sits right on the border with Mexico. It's also not far away from the California state line. Anyway, this is part of the country where a large amount of the lettuce and other vegetables we eat in the winter come from. I met Jose Alfredo in the red shirt and Luis in the baseball hat at a health fair at around 3 a.m. There were literally hundreds of farm workers at the fair and walking around San Luis. Jose Alfredo and Luis told me they've been working in the U.S. for almost 20 years. They both work in the lettuce harvest. They left their homes in Mexico at 11 o'clock at night. They said 6 days a week they have to stand in line 2 to 4 hours at the U.S.-Mexico border to come to work. They said they both have papers that allow them to come into the U.S. legally. I asked them why they didn't just live in the United States. They said that with the low wages that they earn, about $7.50, $8 an hour, they simply can't afford to. Once they come across the border, there are literally dozens of school buses. Sorry for the bad picture, but that was about a 4 a.m. shot with my iPhone. Lined up all over the place. You can kind of see some of those buses in the other picture that's on this email. Workers walk over to the foreman and ask how much they're paying, how much work they have, etc. They then choose a bus and by 5 a.m. are off to work. They said if they're lucky, they maybe get 15 minutes to eat lunch. He said foremen pushed them to work harder and harder. Jose Alfredo talked about how one day when it was hot outside, he fainted and hit his head on top of the hoe he was using. Sister Leticia, next slide, who's on the far right, asked him how old he was. He said 47. He said, look at me. I look and feel like I'm 10 years older. It was true. Jose Alfredo stands a bit hunched over. He keeps his arms hanging by the side of his body while we're talking. He later says that his arms and knees ache by the time he gets home. He said, this work takes the life out of you. I thought about how I'm a year younger. I thought about how I went out for a 6-mile run yesterday evening, and then thought, what a privilege. My body hasn't had to do such hard labor. They said this work is really hard. They often don't have time to stop to go to the bathroom. We asked, how's that possible? They said they're working behind the machine with other workers and can't leave their row. They said if they get to go to the bathroom, they don't have time to wash their hands. They said they know that's bad, but asked what could they do as their supervisor would be yelling at them to get back to work. I asked Luis what happens if they're sick. He said he actually is sick today and has a bad cold. He said if he doesn't work, he doesn't get paid. And if he doesn't get paid, he can't feed his family. Think about those hands. Hands that are touching hundreds of heads of lettuce a day. Hands that may not have been washed after going to the bathroom or may have just wiped a nose. Hands that are working because they have few other options. Hands that are working to feed their families. Sister Letty, who's also in the picture with us, asked them what time they get home. They said somewhere around 4 p.m. Jose Alfredo said yesterday his 5-year-old daughter got mad at him. She said she never gets to see him and she doesn't like the work he does. He said he thought about that and realized every day he's gone for something like 17 hours a day. His eyes swelled up with tears and he said, what choice does he have? I thought about you, Clara, and how much you don't like me being gone, or how much I don't like being away from you and Mama. I said, there's got to be a better way. Jose Alfredo shrugged his shoulders. Jose Alfredo and Luis said they had to go. They thanked Sister Letty and I for talking with them. I said I appreciated them taking the time to educate us. I also thanked them for their work. They both seemed surprised by that. I said, without people like you, we wouldn't eat. They nodded in agreement. We then asked if we could take a picture together. That's what's attached to this email. Let's say a prayer for Jose Alfredo, Luis, and their families next time we eat, and let's never forget the people who feed us. Next slide. Jose Alfredo and Luis are just a small window into the reality of farm workers. As many of you know, perhaps better than I, agriculture is dependent on immigrants to do the work that people born in the United States simply will not do. And so it's very important as we talk about immigration reform to remember what we're talking about is a fundamental economic problem. That if the wages and benefits were competitive, there would be workers. They're not. So we use immigration to address what's an economic problem. And you see that reflected in who has been and continues to be members of our organization. People from all around the world. Right now in Eastern Oregon, we have Karenni refugees from Burma. We have Eritreans, Hutus from Democratic Republic of Congo, in addition to Mexican, Salvadoran, Honduran workers working all together at a big dairy. You can see the global displacement of workers reflected in who are the agricultural workers of today. And I'm proud to say, as part of United Farm Workers, we proudly represent them all. So I wanted to share with you some of the work we've been doing in Mexico. We don't talk very loudly about this for a number of reasons. Security is first and foremost. but I also want to raise some of the challenges and opportunities we're seeing in Mexico. We've been working for the last 3 years with a group that we've come together called Jornalero Safe. It's an acronym for Safe Guest Workers. We've been working with what is the Immigration Committee of the Mexican Catholic Church and some other NGOs in a 3-year documentation project in the largest sending states of Mexico that send workers into the U.S. And we've been hearing anecdotally about a number of issues recruiting or around recruiting, and what workers are being charged, how they're actually being identified to come into the United States. And earlier this year in Mexico, we released the report in Spanish, and probably the next month or two we'll be releasing English here in the United States. And our documentation substantiated what we've been hearing from people, that there's widespread recruiting fraud. One of the communities where Clara and I and Arturo were earlier this week heard workers being charged upwards of $10,000 to gain legal access into the United States. When we worked with the Thai workers, they were being charged somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 each to obtain, and this is a legal H-2A visa. And so it's quite disturbing, because as a traditional labor organizer, when you go out and talk to folks about their rights, their eyes will glaze over, because they are rightly thinking about one and only one thing, which is the debts that they have incurred coming into the United States, and how are they going to pay those off? Because if they don't, there are some very nasty people out there that will do very, very bad things to their family. And increasingly, we're seeing this as one of the primary threats to the integrity of agricultural production in the United States, and I would argue globally. And I'll talk more about this. So, as part of our work with the DPMH, the Immigration Committee of the Catholic Church, we've really learned about the incredible work that they and a number of sisters are doing. They operate 54 Casas Migrantes, which are refugee homes for what we call in Spanish transmigrantes, people coming from another country through Mexico up into the United States. Right now, after the coup in Honduras, we estimate somewhere between 80–90% of those people coming through Mexico are Honduran. Honduras is in free fall. And what happens is these workers or these people fleeing Honduras have no money. And when they come into Mexico, they are deemed illegal. And Mexico, much like states like Arizona and others, had legislation on the books that required police officials to investigate the legal status of anyone with whom they come into contact. And so by definition, they estimate somewhere between, I think, 150 and 2,000, or 200,000, I'm sorry, Hondurans coming through Mexico every year. This entire pool of people that had no legal recourse. Literally, if they called the police, they would be detained and deported. So subsequently, what's happened is the cartels have realized, and some of the police, here's a very lucrative niche. And the church, together with the National Human Rights Commission last year, did a study in which they documented 90% of all trans migrants coming through Mexico have been kidnapped at least once. If you are a woman, chances of being raped at least once are quite high, at least once. And so the next question is, well, my goodness, if these people are fleeing Honduras, they are the poor of the poor. From where are they getting this money? Well, what they are doing is they're kidnapping people in bulk. And what they look for are places where they can gather 50, 75 people together at once, round them up, and take them off and hold them for ransom, and average ransom somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 a head. What just so happens, one of those key places where you have a large number of people gathered are in the Casas Migrantes. So some of the most courageous women I have met in my life, who continue to be inspiring their heroism, are literally running cartel members out with brooms to keep them from kidnapping people that are staying at these homes. This is a house in Lecheria, in the northern suburbs of Mexico City. I was actually in Mexico City when 2 pickup trucks showed up outside the Casa Migrante. Guys with ski masks, armed, high caliber automatic weapons, hopped off the pickups, and they had vests on that said Federal Police, although the rest of their clothes was civilian. Stormed into the house, rounded about 50 people up, and put them into the 2 pickups. And there's actually a video of this because they had a video camera documenting what happened. The most amazing thing happened. The nuns came out and stood in front of the trucks. The neighbors came out of the houses and surrounded the pickups, would not let them leave, unarmed. And the Hondurans realized this is the moment. The nuns were saying, "Run, go, leave," and they all escaped. But this is the heroism that is going on a daily basis. Now, unfortunately, all stories have a good ending. But the narrative that's told here in the United States, when you hear about these mass graves as the cartel violence, well, that's part of the story. But what it is they are murdering people, immigrants, that were unable to pay to make an example to others. But it does not reflect well on the Mexican government for that to be brought to the public's attention. So the church is truly doing some heroic work in Mexico, trying to elevate the rights of trans migrants and get this out. I love the saying up on the far left-hand corner. I'll translate it for folks. And it reads, "If the migrant is not your brother," and I would say sister, "then God is not your father or mother." Now, there's going to be some consequences to this I want to bring back to why we as a US-based farm worker union are quite concerned about what's going on with Honduran immigrants. But first I want to take a slight personal deviation. At home, about 2 years ago, just before Christmas, we received, I live in Tacoma, Washington. We have a for-profit immigration detention center about 3 miles from my house. And this is where, after ICE, Immigration Service, detains people, they load them up on an airplane and fly them up to Tacoma, outside of Seattle, and then park them in this horrendous facility. No windows, it's inhumane. And it turned out the woman on the left, Juana, was going to be awarded refugee status that next morning. Had no place to go, no money, no nothing, and was in urgent need for someone to house her. So we offered her our house. And Juana showed up, and in a horrendous case, and she has given me permission to share her story, she fled a horrendous situation of domestic violence in Honduras. She was raped by her uncle. When her father found out, he confronted her uncle, who was a police officer. Her uncle killed her father. Her brother then went and confronted their uncle, and he killed her brother as well. And her oldest daughter is fathered by her uncle. So at that point, she fled. And from the most remote part of Honduras, came across Mexico, was kidnapped in Mexico, held for ransom. Her family was able to scrounge about $1,000 to get her released. She was raped. She was impregnated. She was, I don't know the right word, she now has AIDS as a result of the rape. And then beaten and left for dead on the streets of Ensenada. And if it wasn't for a Mexican national taking her and bringing her back to health, she would be dead. After being brought back from dead, she was again trying to come to the States and was in Tijuana, and the very people that had kidnapped her the first time saw her. And so she literally ran into the hands of the US immigration officials in a desperate act to save her life. Spent 4 months in the detention facility and was finally released. And thank God her daughter, Genesis, was born without AIDS. But it had been a tremendous struggle for Juana to find her way in the United States. And Ledis, who is now the woman with Juana in the picture to the right, left, has joined our house as about 2 weeks ago. We're not aware of similar trauma, but she also was fleeing a horrendous case of domestic violence in Honduras. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because there's a tremendous need for more of us to offer our homes to people like Juana and Ledis. And I have a request from the folks in Tacoma who are facilitating this for similar households here in Southern California. This very much reminds me of the work I was doing in the 1980s of offering, where many churches offered asylum to Central American refugees, in that case for political refugees. The violence against women is out of control in many countries, and these sisters desperately need some support and love and guidance. So to the degree there's folks interested, I invite you to come up to me afterwards, but a slight personal deviation here. Also in Mexico, talking over dinner, The Obama administration, to say it's been a disappointment would be a tremendous understatement. I cannot remember an administration that has been more antagonistic to immigrants than President Obama. There was an article in yesterday's New York Times, and they have some graphs that I was unable to copy. But look at what it says. By the end of this year, deportations under Mr. Obama are on track to reach 2 million, or nearly the same number of deportations in the United States from 1892 to 1997. Think about that. We deal with the carnage of those deportations on a regular basis in the work we do in Oregon and Washington. Families that are ripped apart. When ICE comes into a community, we've had people hiding in basements of churches. And when we were in Mexico this week, we talked to families that have been torn apart by these deportations. I want to say this because it astounds me the degree to which all of us, in my opinion, have given President Obama a tremendous pass. If this was President Bush, I would argue we would have been in the streets by now. And I don't understand why we're not. And my union is not in the streets, is my personal opinion. I'm going to speak about in a second about immigration reform, but we can't look past this. If we're truly going to be advocates for the voices of immigrants and the people that are putting food on our table, there's tremendous damage being wreaked right now in immigrant communities across the United States and the communities from which they come internationally. So these are pictures from a meeting 2 days ago outside of Morelia, Michoacan, in a town, the municipio of Álvaro Obregón. Sister Irma on the far right, the top right picture, is a nun that is doing courageous outreach work to the immigrant community in Álvaro Obregón. And one of the things that we're starting to hear about that I had never heard about, except in the late 70s, were desaparecidos, people that have disappeared. And I have not had a meeting in Mexico or frankly in the United States when I ask for a show of hands of how many people have a family member that they have not heard from. It's almost impossible to go to a meeting where they will not say, I have an uncle I haven't heard from in 20 years. And in the cases here in Álvaro Obregón, there are many people that have family members they haven't literally seen for 10 or 15 years, at least. And so one of the things that Sister Irma has been working on is simply getting a laptop with a camera. And we're working with her, how can we facilitate here in the States, just video communication, so people can literally just see each other, even if it's by video camera. Because even that basic contact does not happen. Next slide. So the issue of desaparecidos is really coming to the fore, and this is something, again, I remember early when I was growing up in Chile and Argentina, where the military would target progressive union people and they would not be heard from again. We have had members of farm workers in Eastern Oregon coming to our offices and saying they haven't heard from their family member for 2 years or 3 years. Can we help track them down? I would have never, ever imagined in the United States we would have people that have disappeared, but we do. And in Mexico, these are actually papers from yesterday. This is Millennial newspaper. It says, the official list, 5,319 desaparecidos. And by most accounts, people hold the military, the army, and the police, which unfortunately, as history has shown, that we are very actively supporting in arming and training, are responsible for the disappearances of these folks. Another paper, Excelsior, this is a kind of a mainstream, almost like a New York Times type paper, and it says the search for the desaparecidos is kicking into gear. Human Rights Report, or Human Rights Watch, issued a report that has really rocked Mexico and shamed them into taking action and finally starting to look into this issue of what's happened to these people, where are they? And much like in Chile, people trying to find their loved ones after months of years of not seeing them. So this report has just come out. Next slide. So what's going on? And believe me, I'm going to put hopefully a more happier context to this, but I want to do a reality check about the challenges we have. When I started doing this work in the late 80s, it was unheard of for someone to pay more than $50 to come to the United States. You just hop on a bus, go up to the northern border, and if you want to pay someone, you can pay someone. Pretty much go anywhere you want, walk across, and you're done. And what's happened now, as a result of the wall, the militarization, use of high-tech technology to impede the access of people into the United States, it requires a much higher degree of technical sophistication to come in. And that technical sophistication is being monopolized by the hands of a few. And so what has happened, kind of the way the free market labor supply works in Mexico, if I'm a labor recruiter and I come into this gathering and say, hey, I can get you jobs in the States, and I say, well, it's going to be $200, but you know for $50 you can just get on the bus and come in. You're not going to pay me that $200. So what the amount of money is that you pay to gain unlawful entry into the United States kind of sets the floor for what the price is that a recruiter can charge for an H-2A visa or a guest worker visa. With the militarization of the border, what's happened now is that that price has skyrocketed. So it's gone from $50, and Sister Guillermo was telling me 2 days ago, it's not unheard of now for people to hear 10,000. Now, the question obviously is, well, you know, where's someone coming up with 10 grand in Mexico? Well, not to worry. The very same people that know how to gain unlawful entry into the United States or can get secure an H-2A visa so you can come in lawfully, but also paying $10,000, are vertically integrated. They have loan sharks. They will take care of you. And they'll take care of you at maybe 25, 30% monthly interest. And they also know where your family lives. And they will remind you of that if you miss a payment. And they will remind your family of that if they miss a payment. And this is one of the dynamics that our Now Let Us Safe project has started to really document. How rampant this is across Mexico, and how neither the US government is paying attention to it, much less the Mexican government. So what's happening? We're seeing a dramatic increase, in my opinion, of debt peonage and slavery. And I really have to acknowledge here the great work of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers of getting out there and really being on the forefront of uncovering case after case after case of slavery. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying things that like look like slavery or feel like slavery. I am saying slavery. And these are just several of the cases that have been successfully prosecuted after the work of CIW and other advocates have been uncovering what's going on. But if you think about it, it's not a long trajectory to get there. If you're a worker, you pay 10 grand to come up into the States, you're not even making minimum wage, you're very quickly not going to be able to pay the little that you've got. They start threatening you, you've gone from debt peonage into human trafficking, and then if the grower starts withholding money and impeding your ability to move, you're now a slave. And while most of these cases have been in Florida because that's where CIW is really taking the lead. Look, next slide. They're happening all across the country. And I would argue with increasing frequency. There's actually an article in the Millennial talking about in Arizona, they recovered 20 people that were being kidnapped. They had just been come across the border, and the folks that crossed them decided they wanted some more money, held them captive, and then were extorting additional money to release them. So, who's benefiting? I mean, why is this happening? Well, I think a couple things. One, all of these people that have been enslaved are working for major agricultural companies. This isn't peripheral stuff. This is the backbone of US agricultural labor. The growers are not paying attention in large part. The retailers are not paying attention. And so if you don't have anybody looking, this will prosper and this will spread, and that's precisely what's happening. Next slide. And just again, to remind us that we're not the center of the universe, this is actually the Spanish colony in northern Africa of Suetan that has also put up their own wall to try to impede the access of Africans into the European territory, but Spain's not immune to the cases of slavery as well. The dynamics are very much the same. The jobs are being put up for bid, people know that worker immigrants are vulnerable, and then bad things happen because not enough of us throughout the supply chain are watching. Next slide. So I argue, and the UFW is very concerned that this is the wave of the future, and it's actually here. And so in the past, our dichotomy has been, well, domestic workers, workers who are here versus guest workers. And we're very concerned about guest workers. I argue that's something from the past. We need to be concerned about is how workers are actually getting up here, and the degree to which they're being brought in by cartels, that is going to be definitive, because if you've been brought in by the Zetas, it doesn't matter if you've got legal status or not. If you think you're going to talk to someone like me and your family's not going to be exterminated, you're naive. And this is a huge threat that we have to figure out how to address. So, what do? Well, the first thing we do, and this is something that we're at an event, today's Saturday? Yesterday, my goodness. In the state of Michoacan, which is one of the largest sending states of agricultural workers into the United States, we're creating new alliances that we haven't had before. And we have common interests. So we have now twice, and the bottom slides was with the previous governor, the top slide was from yesterday, where we signed this agreement with the state of Michoacan to collaborate, to share information, to educate one another, to advocate on behalf of Michoacanos, be they in Mexico or here in the United States, because we have common cause. And how do we figure out, how are we going to take on these challenges that these recruiters are putting in front of our respective communities? Next slide. We're also doing widespread meetings with our members. This is an indigenous community, Mixtec community outside of Cuxtlahuaca, Oaxaca. Arturo and I and several others were down there earlier this week. And when word came out, we had let our members' family know that we were going to be there. We expected maybe about 20 people. By the time we were done talking, and Arturo was talking about the work we're doing, we had over 300 people amassed outside of the local municipality headquarters. And folks that really wanted to know more information. Same dynamics. Scared about their family members, trying to figure out what's going on. A bunch of them had participated in workplace actions in the Strawberry Campaign in Watsonville, and really struggling. And had several women, and most of the people in attendance were women, in tears. Saying they hadn't seen their husbands, their brothers, their fathers in years, and what could they do? Next slide. So our response is, well, we need to become global. If you think about the food that we've eaten, the tomatoes we had tonight were grown in Mexico. The lettuce most likely was either in Arizona or right across the border in Sonora or Baja. But if you just think about the workers, almost all of the workers employed in agriculture come from somewhere else. And so you've got this global supply chain, and the only thing that's not global about it are us. And so we're working, and I have been asked to lead creating the UFW into a global organization, which is no small task. 3 years ago, we convened a conference of over 40 representatives from 14 different countries, from Asia, Europe, Africa, North and South America. The only continents not represented were Australia and obviously Antarctica, to talk about this. What are our challenges? How are we as farm worker organizations going to work together? Because the more we share notes, the more we realize it's the same the world over. And we've got to figure something out. And so that was the initial step. How do we start building a global network that's going to give hope to our members and provide a more just global supply chain? Next slide. A key part of that is achieving immigration reform. What's been the dynamics I've been talking about, families being ripped apart, people being deported, all predicated on folks not having access, being able to be here legally. We are working very hard with the Obama administration. Arturo, our president, has been at the White House now 4 times since the beginning of the year, and is going to be in DC again next week, for this week. And we are increasingly optimistic that we are going to get some type of immigration reform. Now what it is, there's a lot in play. And some of the major fault lines are, is there really going to be a path to citizenship? Many Republicans, and unfortunately many growers, do not want farm workers or undocumented people to have a path to citizenship. What's the guest worker program going to look like? One of the opportunities we're seeing in the current guest worker program, your ability to remain legally in the United States is predicated on the one and only one employer that has solicited you to come into the States. So the minute you start complaining, exercising your rights, he or she can say, okay, you're done, you're off the list, you're deportable. And what we believe we may have an opportunity to get is what we call portability. So a worker no longer is going to be dependent on the goodwill of one and only one employer to remain legally in the United States. So we'll see where that goes. But obviously, immigration reform is a key component of addressing this issue. But again, I'll share with you, I was talking to strawberry growers yesterday from Michoacan. And I was just, some of the dynamics I'm going to talk about in a second were impacting them. And I asked, well, so where are your workers coming from? And I thought that'd be Purépecha indigenous workers from Western Michoacan. They were saying El Salvador, Guatemala, and South America. And by definition, those folks are not legally employable in Mexico. Costa Rica, the backbone of the agricultural workforce in Costa Rica, undocumented Nicaraguans. So this is an issue that is not unique to us in terms of the legal status or lack thereof of agricultural workers involved in providing us with food. Next slide. So a little bit of economics. These are the brands that control over half of the US food sale. Walmart's about 30%, Costco, and I'm very pleased to see Costco participating and supporting this event because they've been very active in the work I'm about to describe. About 15%, and then Kroger, Safeway, and then Super Values in the salvage operation right now, in the low 10%. And Target is really the new company that's leaping to the fore that had not sold fresh produce in the past. But the significance of this can't be understated. 10, 15 years ago, a grower was a price setter. So I would grow broccoli, and I would be able to go out 15, 20 different grocery stores and figure out who would give me the best price. It's not the case anymore. Because these guys sell such volume, they tell you what they're going to pay. And if you're a big grower, you cannot afford not to sell to all 5 of them. Because if you lose a 10% sale or a 15% sale on volume, your banker is going to be calling you in and reading you the riot act and may even be withdrawing the loan. So these supermarket chains, they know that. And are exercising tremendous net downward price pressure. Well, in the labor world, that's quite concerning, because when we sit down to negotiate with employers, we're increasingly hearing, well, we don't have money. Now, that's something we've heard. I've been hearing for 25 years. I've been doing this work. But as we've been digging deeper, we're seeing that's truly the case. So right now, these are the top countries that are exporting food into the United States. Strawberries are growing by leaps and bounds. We cannot buy enough strawberries in this country, and the retailers are having a significant time sourcing sufficient strawberries because we love them year-round, which was not the case. And where the big production increases are coming from is Mexico. Chile, South America. We expect now to have the produce we like year-round. And as a result now, we have a global supply chain that's feeding us day in and day out. Next slide. So several years back, after the Global Farm Worker Conference, I was invited down to Peru because there's a little bit of a backstory. The state of Washington up until the mid-1990s was one of the largest growers of asparagus. And it was a very important harvest because that was really the harvest that broke the drought of the winter. Early spring harvest, back-breaking, not good paying, but at least there was work. President Clinton signed into law something called the Andean Trade Preference Act, which waived tariffs for countries, the Andean countries, in a way to try to use free market stimulus to get them to grow something other than narcotics. Well, a bunch of very smart Peruvian entrepreneurs went to the desert of Peru where nothing had ever grown before and planted tens of thousands of acres of asparagus, to the point now that over half of the asparagus we consume in the United States comes from Peru. All 4 of the multinationals we had in the state of Washington that processed asparagus are gone. And those were all unionized jobs. They're all down in Peru. The $6, $7, $8, $9 an hour minimum wage jobs that people had in the state of Washington harvesting asparagus are gone. I think last year we had about 3,000 acres. And a number of small farmers also were wiped out. But in Peru, you have workers working for $7 a day, mostly women. Sexual abuse is rampant, and they had no idea what to do. So one of the things that we have now started is consulting with these sisters and helping them build organizations in Peru to better defend themselves and also raise the issues that they're bringing forward to the major retailers with whom we're talking. Next slide. This is the slide that I would say has revolutionized or is revolutionizing the thinking within the United Farm Workers. As pretty much everyone here knows, our way of engaging is with the grower. We think the grower pays too little. We go out there, unionize the grower, and use the collective power of workers to get better wages. Well, this is the apple industry. And we have been hearing for quite a while from the growers that, as I mentioned, they didn't have any money. Well, when we looked at this chart, we realized our whole paradigm is off. Because if you think about this, between the worker and the grower, they're getting 11 cents of the food dollar. So how on God's green earth, as a vice president of the United Farm Workers, are we going to be able to deliver a living wage and benefits for workers if all we have to allocate is 11 cents? It's a lose-lose. The grower's not making enough money, and Lord knows farm workers aren't making enough money. So logic would say, okay, based on this, we should be negotiating with the supermarkets. How do we do that? That's not a traditional collective bargaining arrangement. So as if the international part wasn't enough, this was thrown on my plate, so we'll figure that one out too. And so that's going to lead me into this work that we're doing now in the Equitable Food Initiative. The last ray of sunshine I'll share with you is we were talking at dinner about the 99%ers and the 1%ers. We found a study that was fascinating that looked at the Florida citrus harvest in 1970 and documented the average wage of an orange picker was $3.23 an hour. And just oranges in Florida are picked for juice. They are sold to one of two companies. One of them is called Coca-Cola, the other one is called Pepsi. So not for small anything. And if you just look at, next slide, please. I'll try to make it clear here. So this is a slide we use for our members of 9 gallons of gas. Right now, farm workers in the state of Florida are not even making $7.50, the federal minimum wage. There is widespread, systematic wage theft in the Florida citrus industry. So, but let's just say for the sake of argument that they're getting $7.50, they can't even buy 2 gallons of gas with that. So you think about in the 25 years, that concentration of wealth, or 30 years I guess, someone's making the money and it's not farm workers. And is being literally sucked out of farm worker communities, and our communities are getting poorer and poorer, while others are getting wealthier and wealthier. Next slide. And in case, again, we hear people saying, well, we can't afford to pay farm workers more. This is a slide that the state of Florida actually put together that documents that the labor costs, when we pay $3.39 for some Florida orange juice, of that $3.39, labor costs are 3.5 cents. And oh yeah, by the way, 2.88 includes the profits for the processor and retailer. So again, the system is not structured in a way that it provides a livelihood for farm workers. So we're looking at 2 different things, and I'll quickly take you through a foreign journey here. One is fair trade. How do we leverage the supply chain to get more money back to the people that are putting food on our table? Next slide. So one of the interesting things that attracted us to fair trade was this thing called social premium. For every pound of coffee, for every flour, next slide, that's sold, 10 cents comes back to the farm. Next slide. This is a flour plantation in Ecuador. Ecuador provides us with about 90% of our cut flowers, cut roses. Next slide. And so with that 10 cents quickly becomes tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, which in any country, but especially in a country like Ecuador, is real money. And with that money, the workers get together and figure out what kind of community development projects they can put in place. And you see some tremendous creativity. If you look at the washing machines in the upper left, this is one of the most amazing stories I had the honor of listening. Workers at this flower farm, largely women, mostly indigenous, mostly living in homes that either do not have running water or electricity. And they had been hearing about these things called washing machines. Because the days that they weren't working, they were down at the river washing clothes just like you see, 6, 7 hours on the rocks. And it's like 40 or 50 degrees. We're at about 10,000 feet. So this is not kind of, idyllic kicking in tropical paradise. But they had no way, even with the money, with the social premium, if they could buy these washing machines for their homes, they had no way to set them up. So they got creative and they went to their employer and said, would you give us a spot to set up these washing machines? And so they bought 3 sets and actually hired someone full-time to staff the washing machines. And then they realized, well, not everybody can bring their clothes in on the day off. So what they did is came up with a schedule by which every worker was assigned a day in which she or he could bring in the entire family's dirty laundry at the beginning of the day, turn it in, at the end of the day, have the clothes washed, folded, and returned to them. So they're creating employment, and I had women in tears saying that their lives have been radicalized. They can now have time with their spouses, they can work with their kids on homework, they have a day of their lives, at least a day back, simply because of their creativity and having access to capital that was leveraged back through the supply chain because we made a small decision to buy fair trade rather than not certified product. Next. We're doing work in Colombia. The photo to the right is my daughter's tocaya. Her name is also Clara. She's standing in front of a housing development that the workers built for themselves. The sales of fair trade bananas in Colombia are generating over $1 million a year in revenue for workers to do these tremendous community development projects. Next slide. So this is a test. These are obviously bathrooms. One is in North Carolina. The other one is in Colombia. Show of hands on the left. Which one, folks that think the bathroom on the left is North Carolina? Oh, you guys are good. Amazing. Both are legal. There is no statutory requirement in the state of North Carolina to provide private bathrooms for farm workers. Yet in Colombia, they figured out that, something you just need to be respectful of your workers and give them a nice place to go to the bathroom. By a similar token, this is shade that's provided to Brazilian coffee plantation workers. Next slide. And these are faces of farm workers here in California who've died because growers could not remember to put shade drinking water out and have died of heat stress. Next slide. And not only are farm workers dying because of access to basic protection, but so are consumers. Thousands of consumers every year are killed based on foodborne illness, E. coli, listeria, other outbreaks, and these are some of the faces of people that have been so killed. Next slide. And the causes are very simple. Deer poop, in the lower right, killed a 62-year-old woman in Oregon. Bought strawberries at a farmer's market. She believed kind of the mythology out there that somehow smaller is better. In this case, or safer. It's not. Deers will poop anywhere. There was deer poop in the field. Strawberries were picked. She ate them, and she unfortunately passed away. She was killed. 16 other people were hospitalized. Picture in the upper left, a picture from Salinas. Feral pigs wandering the fields, they also poop. They also are a major source of contamination. And these are pictures, the picture on the far left are pictures of workers that our members took with their cell phones. Next slide. So finally, what are we doing about all this? Well, we're realizing that if companies like Costco, Walmart, Safeway can all tell a grower, well, we want strawberries that are this big, that have a certain amount of sugar content, that look like this in terms of ripeness, well, why can't they tell the growers that they got to treat workers right and make sure the food is safe and the environment is protected? And believe it or not, it's working. So we have created, in conjunction with the organizations listed on the right, what's called the Equitable Food Initiative, or a coalition of 13 different organizations. And small companies like Costco are there. We are talking to every one of those retailers that appeared on the previous slide, and they're all interested. And it's not because they're looking at farm workers that somehow the pobrecitos that need to be the benevolent recipients of our patronizing concern.
but that farm workers can really improve the integrity of our food supply. Because if workers had been trained not to pick the strawberries that they were on deer food and affirmed when they didn't, that one would be alive right now. And 16 people would not have had to run to the hospital. If workers were affirmed when a feral pig is seen wandering around the pigs to cordon off that area, we can provide a higher degree of safety to consumers that eat that product. And that brings real value. So people like Costco are saying, absolutely. And not only absolutely, we're willing to pay the growers more for this. And the workers are saying, okay, well, if you want us to do that, we need more too. And we're saying, absolutely. And so we're finding a paradigm by which we're getting all of the interests aligned. Costco is going to be able to tell its members, we have a safer, more just product for you. Growers are going to be affirmed because they are working collaboratively with workers to provide that safer, more just product. And workers are being trained, educated about their rights and responsibilities so they can be the linchpin to making this happen. Next slide. So finally, we're doing this, we've been prototyping our first engagement at a non-union farm. Not only is it a non-union farm, but the guy in the upper right, some of you may remember a company called Coastal Berry. He used to be the president of Coastal Berry. So we have some history. The United Farm Workers led a very tough fight against Coastal Berry and against Ernie to unionize Coastal Berry. And we're now partnering with them when we're not unionizing this farm right now. And frankly, we're not sure if we need to or will. And Ernie has been a fascinating partner because by partnering with him, we're very clear. Ernie does not make enough money to pay workers what they deserve. Costco does. Walmart does. Kroger does. So do we now have an opportunity to partner with people like Ernie so he can get rich? And I'm very clear about this. I want Ernie to go laughing to the bank and finally reach his aspirations to be part of the 1%. I truly do. Because I want every one of those workers in his employment to make it $30 an hour with full medical benefits and pension. Because that's what they deserve. And the only way we're going to do that if we can figure out a way to provide a better product for consumers that protects the integrity of the brands for retailers and that money flows back through the supply chain. And so what's happened is we've done trainings. The lower right-hand slide is our training room. This is a cooler. We've had some funny things. We had our sheets up on some boxes. The forklift comes up, lifts up the boxes, and out goes all of our big sheets with our notes on it. But this is the reality of farm work. The person on the far left is Todd Egan. He's the global buyer of strawberries for Costco. First time in his life, he's had the opportunity to talk to farm workers. And I mean, really talk to farm workers. So this has really given farm workers an affirmation that they truly are important in providing all of us with the food that we value. They've never had the opportunity to talk to someone like Todd, much less engage a person like Ernie on an equal basis. So this year we're looking at engaging about 10 more farms. Lucy, we're looking forward to being one of our trainers out there and helping workers and management learn how to work together to provide the quality of product that's going to take for this thing to happen. But we're very excited. We think this has huge opportunity, and not only in the United States, but to go global. And we've been meeting with growers in Peru, Mexico, all around the world, because 41 countries right now are supplying Costco with fresh produce. So here's an opportunity to really radicalize agricultural production in a way that's been unheard of, and that we would never have dreamt about 5 years ago in United Farm Workers. And under our leadership and co-direction, slowly we're messing it up as much as we can so we can learn, but making it happen. So what I want to leave you with, taking it back to Jose Alfredo and Luis, when I'm interviewed about immigration reform, I like to bring it back to whose hands do you want touching your food? Do you want someone who's educated and trained, who's looking out for the welfare of my daughter, your grandkids, your parents? Or do you want someone that is, thousands of dollars in debt, who's terrified that if she speaks out, something horrible is going to happen to her family, that's just going through the motions to survive? I think that's the threat and the opportunity we have, and I appreciate the time being here with you tonight to share. Thank you.